Biden's democracy targets Trump as the enemy of the state. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about President Joe Biden's speech that he gave on January 5th in Pennsylvania, where he was commemorating the 3-year anniversary of the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol, which Biden holds Trump singularly responsible for. You will recall that Trump was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives for an insurrection for the speech that he gave that day, where he called for protesters to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. But that then the U.S. Senate had acquitted former President Donald Trump of that charge. So he's already been charged with insurrection. But that's not stopping now the states of Colorado and now Maine from attempting to keep Trump off of the ballot. And now the Supreme Court has granted a writ of certiorari to hear this case. And it's going to be happening in the next few weeks alone here. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to hear what President Biden had to say at this speech. Remarks by President Joe Biden on the 3rd anniversary of the January 6th attack and defending the sacred cause of American democracy in Blue Bell, Pennsylvania. This is at Montgomery County Community College. And here is the speech itself. And so we'll just jump right into it.
Today, we're here to answer the most important of questions. Is democracy still America's sacred cause? Need it. This is not rhetorical, academic, or hypothetical. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about. The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy, put himself in power. Our campaign is different. For me and Kamala, our campaign is about America. It's about you. It's about every age and background that occupies this country. It's about the future we're going to continue to build together. And our campaign is about preserving and strengthening our American democracy. 3 years ago tomorrow, we saw with our own eyes the violent mob storm the United States Capitol. It was almost in disbelief as you first turned on the television. For the first time in our history, insurrectionists had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. First time. Smashing windows, shattering doors, attacking the police. Outside, gallows were erected as the MAGA crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." Inside, they hunted for Speaker Pelosi. The House was chanting as they marched through and smashed windows, "Where's Nancy?" Over 140 police officers were injured. Jill and I attended the funeral of police officers who died as a result of the events of that day. Because of Donald Trump's lies, they died because these lies brought a mob to Washington.
When patients experience pain, I recommend
He promised it would be wild, and it was. He told the crowd to fight like hell, and all hell was unleashed. He promised he would right them. Everything they did, he would be side by side with them. Then, as usual, he left the dirty work to others. He retreated to the White House. As America was attacked from within, Donald Trump watched on TV in a private small dining room off the Oval Office. The entire nation watched in horror. The whole world watched in disbelief. And Trump did nothing. Members of his staff, members of his family, Republican leaders who were under attack at that very moment pled with him. Act. Call off the mob. Imagine had he gone out and said, stop. And still, Trump did nothing. It was among the worst derelictions of duty by a president in American history.
So that is what Joe Biden is saying. He's saying, "Oh, Trump did nothing. There was nothing. There was no actions that were taken by President Trump that day to mitigate what was going on." But yeah, I think you will recall on January 6th, while the riot was actually going on, that then President Trump actually issued a statement telling his supporters to go home, and that there were actions that were taken that day, which we're going to cover in this video. But first, I wanted you to hear what Trump actually had to say to his supporters when the riot was still ongoing.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace.
So that was what Trump had to say. He said, "Go home and go home in peace." But Joe Biden, he's had 3 years to analyze the record here. He could potentially, if he's saying that what Trump was saying related to January 6th is, could cause whatever. It can cause people to be violent or something like that. Why not note the things that Trump did to actually mitigate the riot, as we're going to do right now? It was Trump who actually acted to suppress the riot at the Capitol with the National Guard. I had documented this. He actually alerted his followers. What is this? This is on July. This was in July of 2023. I put this together. He sent a letter. He's alerted his followers on Truth Social on July 18th that he had sent a letter stating that I am the target of the J6 grand jury investigation and give me a very short 4 days to report to the grand jury, which almost certainly means arrest and indictments. This is prior to the indictments. So now Joe Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, together with Joe Biden's Justice Department of Injustice, has effectively issued an indictment for their political opponent. Nothing like this has ever happened in our country before. It's a very sad period. And he's noting that he's going to be indicted for January 6th. While it's unclear the nature of the indictment, it turns out that we're going to go, it's not an insurrection charge, but they're, supposed election type of fraud or interference type of charge for challenging the election results. That's ultimately what Jack Smith brought. That's similar indictment to Fulton County, Georgia. That's being brought in that jurisdiction as well. And so basically he had given a speech that day. He says, we're going to challenge the election results. There was an election challenge that day in Congress. There were votes for Arizona and Pennsylvania, which failed. Those electors were all certified, but there was votes to basically pull those electors back. But also there would have been a vote for Georgia, but for the riot, they lost their sponsors in the Senate to have a vote on the Georgia electors as well, but they probably would have failed as well. In any event, in part, we know acting defense secretary at the time, Chris Miller, had issued, he had testified about this. He said he had a meeting with Trump on January 3rd concerning some international threats. And at the very end, he asked if there were any requests for National Guard support for January 6th. And Miller relayed that what Trump said was, quote, fill it and do whatever's necessary to protect the demonstrators. And then he had said on Truth Social on June 9, 2022, that he had authorized up to 20,000 National Guard troops if they had been requested, but that those requests did not come. He stated, quote, the Unselect Committee has now learned that I, as president, suggested and offered up to 20,000 National Guard or troops to be deployed in D.C. because it was felt that the crowd was going to be very large. Crazy Nancy Pelosi turned down the offer and she didn't like the way it looked. Likewise, the mayor of DC. Now, the only request for National Guard was a very limited request by DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, according to a March 18, 2021 report by the Department of Army headquarters. We have this here. And then in my piece, I'm going to quote parts of it that are relevant to an inquiry about, oh, Trump did nothing. It's like, well, actually, that's not true. He had the guard on the ground, and the guard ultimately is put there. In addition to telling people to go home, he had the guard there to basically have people come off of the Capitol grounds because they didn't have a right to be there. And then, according to the Department of Army headquarters, there was this request on December 31, 2020. Mayor Bowser requested DC National Guard support of BOT, the Metropolitan Police Department, and the DC Fire and Emergency Services during planned First Amendment demonstrations on January 5, January 6th. The mayor explicitly directed that no DC National Guard personnel shall be armed during this mission, and at no time will DC National Guard personnel or assets be engaged in domestic surveillance searches or seizures of U.S. persons. And that was a quote. Later that day, the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, HSEMA, requested 6 crowd management teams to manage crowds at specified metro stations and a team to assist at 30 designated traffic posts. HSMEA requested personnel from 0730 to 2400 on January 5 and 6 and specified that they were to be equipped with visibility vested and lighted wands. So that was the request. Now, according to the National Guard, on January 6, 2021, 1,110 National Guardsmen were sent in on top of the more than 300 who were already there that very day, plus 6,200 in the days that followed, by Miller, who was acting under the authority of former President Trump to restore order at the Capitol. Whatever was on the ground, both prior to and after the riot began, were all acting under the president's authority, as we'll see here. According to the press statement by the National Guard on January 8, 2021, they stated, quote, at around 2 p.m., D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser requested more assistance. Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller immediately called up 1,100 members of the D.C. National Guard. At the same time, officials were collecting guardsmen at traffic points and metro stations and returning them to the D.C. Armory to refit for a crowd control mission, the secretary stated. Their mission was to support the D.C. Metropolitan Police and Capitol Hill Police. Guardsmen started flowing into the area of the Capitol soon after and reinforced Metro Police on the perimeter of the Capitol. This allowed the police and the FBI to clear the chambers and offices of the U.S. Capitol. And it worked, according to the Secretary of Army, Ryan McCarthy, from the statement, quote, by 7:15 p.m. on January 6th, both chambers and leadership offices were cleared and members were able to return to business, and we began the planning for the following day. The press statement continued, quote, at 6 p.m., Miller authorized the mobilization of up to 6,200 Guards members from Maryland, Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. These service members will flow into the city over the next few days and will help secure the peaceful transfer of power of President Joe Biden on January 20, 2021. Now, one can argue about whether there were enough forces to begin with and whether DC's minimal request for assistance from the Guard should have been overridden by Trump. He could have done that. But those are all political questions which the president had discretion. He didn't have to offer assistance or honor the request for assistance, and yet he did both before and the day of. The Army report also outlined under what authority the DC Guard acts, confirming the chain of command that was in place that day and every day for that matter, with the president ultimately in charge of the Guard. As provided in DC Code Section 4-409, the president is the commander-in-chief of the District of Columbia National Guard. But through Executive Order 11485, dated October 1, 1969, he authorized and directed the Secretary of Defense to supervise, administer, and control the DC National Guard. By memorandum dated 10 October 1969, the Secretary of Defense directed the Secretary of Army to act for him in matters related to the District of Columbia National Guard, and directed Secretary of Army to, quote, command through the commanding general of the National Guard all operations of the Army and Air National Guard elements, end quote. after consultation with the Secretary of Defense and subject to the direction of the President as Commander-in-Chief and in accordance with the Interdepartmental Action Plan for Civil Disturbance, may order out the National Guard under Title 39 of the District of Columbia Code to aid civilian authorities of the District of Columbia. And here you can see that this is the section quoted from the Army report. Additionally, per the Army report, quote, the President appoints and commissions the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard and may remove the commanding general from office at any time. Now, Trump, he appointed all of the officials who were directly responsible for the D.C. Guard and controlling any civil disturbances in Washington, D.C., and they all acted that very day on January 6, 2021, under the Commander-in-Chief's authority to order out the Guard and to restore order. So to the extent that there was a riot, Trump suppressed it. If if others want to come out and say that was an insurrection, Trump suppressed it. But yet the argument tends to be that he had caused it. Now, he called for everyone to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. We can play that clip. I have it right here. Here's what Trump actually stated at the Save America rally. Again, Congress was to be considering these objections on the floor of the House. Here's what Trump said.
We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Today we will see whether Republicans stand strong for integrity of our elections, but whether or not they stand strong for our country.
So that's what Trump has stated. He had called for a peaceful protest. So to try to tie his speech to the incident of the riot, it doesn't particularly work. In fact, the House of Representatives impeached him for insurrection, and then he was acquitted by the U.S. Senate. The call for peaceful protest was not heeded, as some of the crowd breached the perimeter around the Capitol. They did attack police officers, and they did proceed into the Capitol, broke down doors, smashed windows, etc. Now, under no standard, though, would Trump's speech ever constitute incitement of insurrection, as they are political speech protected fully under the First Amendment. Again, he was charged with incitement of insurrection. He was acquitted by the U.S. Senate in that trial. The single article of impeachment stated, quote, he willfully made statements that in context encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol. Now, again, he said also on Twitter, he posted, we had played his video where he said, go home. But on Twitter, he also stated, I am asking for everyone at the Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order, respect the law, and our great men and women in blue. And so we can actually look at the there's the tweet that Trump had made that day. We could actually go to Twitter directly to see it. It's going into the web archive there. That's fine. Here's the actual statement. I'm asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order, respect the law. And so this was at 3:13 in the afternoon. While the riot was still going on. And on January 13th, he also issued another statement denouncing violence. In light of reports of more demonstrations, I urge that there must be no violence, no lawbreaking, and no vandalism of any kind. That is not what I stand for. It is not what America stands for. I call on all Americans to help ease tensions and calm tempers. Thank you. So even in the days afterwards, Trump was denouncing violence and trying to, have a peaceful transfer of power. So there were calls for peaceful demonstrations both before and after the riot. I note here that in Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969, the Supreme Court found, quote, the constitutional guarantees of free speech and free press do not permit a state to forbid or prescribe advocacy of the use of force or of law violation, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to ensue or produce such action. Now, this was a case of white supremacists who were doing demonstrations. They were, in fact, calling for the overthrow of the government. However, there was no actual attempt to do so. And so, therefore, it was protected speech under the First Amendment. That's the constitutional jurisprudence. That's the landmark Brandenburg v. Ohio 1969 decision. So you're allowed to call for the overthrow of the government. You're just not allowed to act on it. In this case, Trump didn't even do that. There was no call to engage in any rioting, insurrection, or rebellion or violence of any sort. Ironically, the riot prevented legal actions by the members of Congress from being heard on the floor, and it actually delayed. So there was the riot at the Capitol. There were going to be these votes on Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, but then the riot delayed it. So it actually prevented the election challenges from being heard. So in the House, it wasn't heard till 11 p.m. On January 6th, and then at 3 a.m. on January 7th to hear Arizona and Pennsylvania, respectively. Electors for Georgia, objections to the electors from Georgia were withdrawn after the riot. Critically, when these objections were heard on the floor of Congress, former Vice President Mike Pence stated for the record that they had been made, quote, in accordance with the law. As if there was any doubt, challenges to the Electoral College are heard by Congress in accordance with the Electoral Counts Act, underscoring that Trump's speech at the Save America rally on January 6, 2021 was a First Amendment protected political speech. He had a right to challenge the election. Al Gore challenged the election in 2000. Liz Stein, she challenged the election in 2016. There were objections brought to the floor of the House of Representatives and the Senate when Donald Trump was going to be, the Electoral College was brought in for 2016. It wasn't seconded though, but it could have been. There could have been seconded by members of the Senate, and then they could have had the very same process playing out in Congress in 2017. Not that they would have succeeded, but these challenges are allowed to be heard. They're in accordance with the law. And Mike Pence said so that day. As for the riot itself, the indictment against Trump, it appears to have the Justice Department attempt to argue that Trump both simultaneously incited the riot and then acted to put it down. Yet he had a First Amendment right to make the speech, and he had the power to put the guard on the ground prior to the speech, which he did, and via the chain of command. But I guess it's not about the facts. It's really about attempting to interfere in the 2024 election. By wrongly, under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, disqualifies anyone who, quote, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer to support the Constitution shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. From being a senator, representative, or an elector for president, or, quote, any office, civil or military under the United States, upon simple majority votes of Congress signed into law by the president under Section 5, which grants Congress, quote, power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. But the criteria otherwise is, to be president, you got to be 35 years old. You got to be a natural born citizen. In this case, though, the Justice Department seems to, they moved forward with their trials, but they haven't charged him with insurrection. But that's not stopping the states of Maine and Colorado from now attempting to remove Trump from the ballot. But fortunately, the Supreme Court is intervening now. And the case Trump v. Anderson is going to, on January 5th, they stated that, quote, the petition for a writ of certiorari is granted. The case is set for oral argument on Thursday, February 8, 2024. The petitioner's brief on the merits and any amicus curiae briefs in support or in support of neither party are to be filled on or before Thursday, January 18, 2024. So this is happening right now. The Supreme Court's acting immediately. Respondent briefs on the merits and any amicus curiae briefs in support are to be filled on or before Wednesday, January 31, 2024. The reply brief, if any, is to be filed on or before 5 p.m. Monday, February 5th, 2024. So you're going to have oral arguments for the Trump v. Anderson case occurring on February 8th. We'll be watching that very, very closely because the implication is that if the Supreme Court upholds what Maine and Colorado have done, that Trump wouldn't be allowed to stand for election, even though he's not been charged with insurrection in a criminal context. He was impeached for it, but then he was acquitted by the U.S. Senate. So there could be some questions of double jeopardy that are maybe will be a part of this challenge. We're going to find out if they can just keep on trying Trump over and over again for insurrection, if the Senate already acquitted him, and or if a state official can just say that anyone's committed insurrection and therefore cannot stand for election for president without any trial. And I think that there's serious due process considerations there, but there's also a constitutional crisis being created because you can't. The American people and not the Secretary of State of Maine or the Supreme Court of Colorado. The American people should be deciding who gets to run for president and who's going to stand for election, and then who's going to win the election. That is our system, and when we don't follow that system, it can be very, very dangerous, as it was in 1860 when the outcome of the election, when Abraham Lincoln was elected, was not respected, and states were seceding from the Union. So I think the fact that the Supreme Court is taking this case up is probably a good sign for Trump and his supporters that he's going to be allowed to be on the ballot. Because all the Supreme Court had to do to prevent Trump from being on the ballot was to just say, we're not going to hear any appeals to do with the Trump v. Anderson case. And then the Colorado decision would stand, which is stayed right now. So right now, as of right now, Trump's going to be on the ballot in Colorado, pending an appeal to the Supreme Court. That appeal is now being heard. So Trump stays on the ballot pending the appeal. If the court wanted to remove Trump from the ballot without hearing the case, they could have done that and said, we're not going to hear that appeal. And then the Supreme Court decision in Colorado would have stood. The Maine decision by the Secretary of State, that would have stood. So the fact that they're going to hear the case might indicate that they're planning on going forward and probably overturning this. That's certainly what we're urging them to do in order to kind of pour cold water on this constitutional crisis, which has clearly gotten out of hand. Trump, he had a right to give the speech. The riot was unfortunate. Fortunately, the National Guard was put out there very quickly. Because Trump had already stationed them there, and then they were able to expand those authorities under the chain of command to get out there and to suppress the riot so that it didn't get any worse. So let's go to now. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. But first, we're going to go to the chat here. I'm sure you're all want to talk and have your opinions here. Let's see here. Tammy Sullivan Sorrow says, I love Trump. Okay. Let's see. Paula White. Democrats believe the words patriotically and peacefully mean attack. The far left Democrats have been lying to everyone for years. When are people going to wake up? Biden and his administration could never pass a lie detector test. Let's see. Larry Robbins says, what a joke. Charles Teixeira says, Trump is innocent. Let's see here. And Trump 2024. Larry Robbins says, Trump another 4 years. Teresa Ka says, Trump is completely innocent. Linda Ann Burson Webb. So say my state of Georgia would take these measures against the candidate. Really unbelievable. I don't think it's unbelievable at all. It's unfortunate, but given the context, given how immediately the House had pursued an insurrection charge against Trump, the idea that they're going to go, and it failed. He was acquitted. They couldn't remove him from office and bar him from running again. The reason to bring the trial against Trump, even after he left office, was to try to disqualify him from running again. So clearly they figured that Trump's electoral challenge was going to help him secure the Republican nomination in 2024, kind of cleared the field a little bit. And made it so that people wanted to vote for him again. It's like, oh, he's going to try to run again. We need to stop him. So they tried to disqualify him via the impeachment and removal and disqualification. It failed. He was acquitted. So then you have these trials that now there's 4 trials against him right now. And 2 of them are relevant, I think, to January 6th. One of them is by federal special counsel Jack Smith, the other by the state of Georgia. But I don't think it's unbelievable. I think this is kind of the predictable outcome of pursuing this and just ignoring, Trump's, calls to be peaceful, what he did to suppress the riot, and statements that he's made thereafter. It's like, no. We need this to be a rebellion. We're going to try to remove him from the ballot. Lots of people are warning that this could lead to, civil conflict or some type of civil war. I think this is very dangerous. And so we have to be very careful. Let's see here. Jerry Mackey says, let's talk about what Sleepy Joe has done to our country. That's a good point. Nobody's talking about issues in this election. It's all about whether Trump can be on the ballot at the moment in January 6th. Grant Noah says, all the Trump 2024 comments, LMFAO, you're all a bit nutty, huh? I don't know. Trump's leading the polls, so I don't know. Maybe half the country is nuts if they want to see him reelected, or maybe the Republicans who are voting for him in the primary, maybe they're nuts, or maybe they just prefer him and they want to, have their say in the election and choose their candidate and not have, Congress or the courts or secretaries of state determining who gets to run against Joe Biden. Maybe that's what they're. Maybe the secretaries of states and Jack Smith, maybe they're the ones who are nuts. Let's see here. Helia Rossini, Donald Trump, America first. Are we already seeing that destruction? That was when Biden brought in Klaus Schwartz, favorite disciple. This is a quote from, I guess, Donald Trump. I'm not sure what the context is. Jerry Mackey says Biden is corrupt, treasonous, appointed stooge that was installed by FBI, CIA, and deep state. All must be gone. Let's see. Walter Belstead says, God bless President Donald J. Trump. Mars Noir says, success to he who God will elect. Let's see. We have Alan Alexander. The citizens of the United States of America need to understand it is a constitutional republic. It is not a democracy. I think this is worth noting. If you want to have a direct democracy, read your Federalist Papers, because it was explicitly ruled out, precisely because, ancient democracy, the Athenians, they had processes for ostracism. You could vote people out of the city via a referendum, and they could be exiled for a period of 10 years. During the Peloponnesian Wars, there was the trial of the generals. They were trying and executing their best generals who were trying to protect Athens. It led to the fall of Athens to Sparta in that war. So there are certain, I believe, vices of democracy that the framers sought to avert, and ostracism and, executing the generals and that sort of thing certainly was one of them. I would note, the ancient Romans had similar problems, for different reasons, even though there were separations of powers that occurred there. And so in any event, the framers sought, through the separation of powers, executive, legislative, judicial branches, plus federalism, distributing certain powers to the federal government, and then certain powers are left over for the states. All of this was to prevent the vices that would lead to civil wars. James Madison was assuring us in the Federalist Papers that this would, this Constitution, the one we had, would prevent civil wars. Thomas Paine would make similar promises during ratification, saying this will avert civil wars. So, but everyone was worried that a Democratic or Republican type of government could result in civil wars. And you know what? The framers were wrong. And the critics were correct. Because just a couple generations later, we had the American Civil War in 1860, when the outcome of the election was not respected, and the southern states seceded, because they didn't want Abraham Lincoln to be president. And it was very tragic. Hundreds of thousands of Americans died in that war. We don't want to see anything like that happen again, because millions of people would die if you just. If what happened in 1860 and 1861 up to 1865, all that happened again today, it would be a catastrophe. And so everyone who's trying to put us back onto the highway to hell towards civil conflict, they should, we need to take an off ramp here. So hopefully the Supreme Court's going to do something to, I think, just allow us to vote in the election, let the Republicans select who their nominee is going to be, whether it's Trump or DeSantis or Nikki Haley, or Vivek Ramaswamy, whatever. Let the Republican Party, through its primaries, determine who their nominee is going to be. And then once that happens, let the general election decide, if it's Trump versus Biden, well, let the American people choose. We don't need to have official actions by the Justice Department. You don't need to imprison your opponent, Joe Biden. Shame on you for trying it. Shame on you for not, calling off the special counsel in this regard. I think that Biden could have already done much to, I think, mitigate the outcomes that we're seeing, but he seems determined to prosecute his political opponent in an election year. And I think that's just travesty. So again, that was for Alan Alexander. Citizens of the U.S. need to understand this is a constitutional republic. Hopefully, the separation of powers, Article 3, judicial branch, will intercede and spare us all another crisis like we had in 1860. Just one more comment here. Teresa DeLee Swan, the real nuts are the loonies that are ruining our country. Amen, Teresa. Again, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Joe Biden's democracy, it's making Trump the enemy of the state. And are we in a constitutional crisis? Again, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good evening.